you might see a pop up asking you to acknowledge that. So do note that tonight's meeting will be recorded and probably posted publicly for those who can't make it tonight. So again, welcome. We are here tonight to just explore some design concepts, really, for a property down in South Amherst, and we are excited to be joined by professionals from Joy Squared Architecture who have put together some exciting concepts for us to look at. And I just want to talk a little bit about what we're going to see tonight and process generally. I'll note I'm here on behalf of the town. Again, I'm the associate planner. I'm here with Dave Zomack, who's the assistant town manager as well. And process-wise, what we're doing here tonight is looking at the results um, of a sort of design exploration that Joy Squared has completed for us. And this is a kind of an initial step in a scoping of a property, which, if we pursued as the town development of, would include multiple successive steps. Certainly including most significantly land use approvals, perhaps through the planning board or zoning board of appeals. So tonight's is not a formal land use hearing. It's really an opportunity to explore some design concepts specific to this property, and to share details and hear some feedback on those designs. But should this process go forward, there'd be plenty of other opportunities for public to weigh in and so forth. So with that noted, just briefly, I'm going to say that we'll hand the floor or the figurative Zoom mic over to Sarah and Bob, and then let them share the results of their work, kind of where they started and where we've arrived to as of today. But then from there, we'll have the opportunity to ask questions about design or process or the property specifically, or other related matters to to our efforts here. So we will have a period for questions and feedback at the conclusion of this presentation, which should be about 35 minutes. And then from there, we'll kind of be able to stack some big picture questions. Our goal tonight is to be complete with the formal presentation by 6:30, but should folks have specific questions and want to hang on beyond that time, we'll be here to address those. So I think that's kind of the big picture framing. And with that, I'd like to welcome and hand it over to Sarah and Bob.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm Bob Wagoner, principal at Joy Square Design, and Sarah Briggs, one of my colleagues there, has done a lot of work here that we're excited to share with you tonight. I'm guessing that some of you may have been to the earlier meeting where we met at the church and participated in a design process to look at different characteristics of the site. And tonight Sarah's gonna show you a little bit of that history, so you'll see some of what happened there a little bit, but we won't spend too much time with that, but just sort of an update of sorts to get us to where we are today. And we've looked at a lot of options, and so we ask you to take all of it in and store up your questions for a good conversation afterwards. You're going to see a variety of approaches to it. It doesn't mean that any of them are a particular direction that we're promoting or that the town has decided on. It's as Greg said, it's in this exploration stage, so it's a time to kind of think broadly and learn from one another and hear your thoughts on it. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to walk us through the presentation.
Hi. Yeah, so it's exciting to be here sharing this stuff. I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay, so everyone can see my presentation. Okay, cool. Town of Amherst and Joy Squared. Here I've got a little overview just to let you know where we're going. The ultimate destination is to talk about the design options that we have come up with. But first, just to get into the site a little bit, as Bob said, I'm sure some of you were here for the first meeting. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the site and don't really need this, but for anyone who isn't so familiar, we're down in southern Amherst here, and I've got a little orientation plan. We're on Southeast Street, just where it splits with Middle Street at the South Amherst Commons. That's these spaces in the middle, and it's a very nice asset that we have on the site. A lot of beautiful trees there and a great view to that space. Just to go through again quickly, because I'm sure some of you have seen this before, some of the studies that we did, just exploring proximity to amenities in the area, to a bus line, to sort of contextualize it. We also looked into the zoning. It is in a neighborhood residence, definitely mostly a single family area. It's also in the Aquifer Recharge Protection Overlay District, which shouldn't have a huge impact, but definitely something to keep in mind in our development process. It's also in the South Amherst Common Historic District, and just sort of looking at some of the historic buildings in that area, looking at some photos, and we noticed a lot of really nice historical homes, centuries old homes, as well as some agricultural context in the immediate area. That's kind of cool. This is the little local library in the immediate area and a church. And then sort of looking into the character of some of these buildings and how that historical context manifests itself in the built environment. The roof lines are really recognizable, and that's something that we tried to keep in mind in all of the schemes that we looked at. And then, yeah, one historic feature in our immediate area is the schoolhouse building, which whether or not that is to stay, we've sort of explored both in our studies, and we've just got some exterior interior photos to give context to that. We can come back to that at any point if we want to. And then to get into what we've done already, we had, as we've said, one public meeting, one meeting with a few developers in the area who helped to give us some insights on what they need to develop a project. And then before, after, in between those meetings, we've had a bunch with the town to sort of develop our trajectory for these schemes. Yeah, we've got some photos here from the first meeting. Maybe you're in these photos. We did a little bit of visual voting here on some precedents. We had a little model to play with and study different sizes on the site. And then we had a lot of feedback in the form of sticky notes that we collected, and both the character of the buildings that people are interested in, the scale, and also the outdoor spaces was something that a lot of people had interest in. And then we just have a few takeaways from our developer meeting that have really shaped the direction of our plans that we studied. And the biggest thing is definitely the size. I know that the scale is definitely a big issue for a lot of people, and we want to respect the scale of the neighborhood while developing something that is going to be fundable. And for a lot of our developers, it's really kind of a minimum of about 20 units, and ideally would be a bit higher to make the pro forma work. So that's something we've explored a range there. The renovation cost of the school is definitely substantial, and it's can be definitely worth it for a historic building, but that's something to, there's a cost benefit analysis there. And then the zoning definitely, as it does not currently support multifamily housing. So that's a complication of this site. But I think I don't know, Greg, if you wanted to comment on that at all, or we might come back to it in the Q&A portion. Um,
Sure, I can just briefly add that different outcomes might require different interventions here, and there's going to be trade-offs. I think the school building being the most significant there. But and as to the zoning, we it's likely that in order to successfully do something, there would need to be some form of zoning relief. How that looks is or might look would need to be determined.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think there's a variety of options for that. Okay, so the next area is we did a lot of precedent studies, and some of these were precedent buildings that we were aware of that we found through our research. A lot were recommended to us by the town, by some residents as well. A lot that are positively received, and a lot of recent developments. So we had looked at a few typologies as far back as the first public meeting, looking at um, courtyard, uh, cottage courtyard developments are development. Well, I want to call it a trend, but it actually goes back pretty far. I found in our research, but so this is one precedent that we found in Massachusetts of, these single family homes that are clustered in a different way than is typical to sort of create a micro community, um, and how that looks when it's actually built. A similar precedent here. We also explored, a smaller scale of multifamily buildings. These are on Fearing Street in Amherst, and it's just recently built. So we have one image, but a lot of renderings from the architect. We have another sort of mid-scale where you're getting into a larger cluster of units and how that feels on a similar size site. uh, we brought up the typology of the row house, and we had in the first public meeting some more urban types of row houses that were not super well received. But I think there is a place to study that typology even in the context of Amherst. And then some increasingly larger buildings. Amethyst Brook just recently built in Pelham. Um, this is actually a Joy Squared project, which is in development for Amherst, and sort of exploring the typology of the New England Inn for a way to build a larger building in a residential context, in a historic New England context, and feel at home. And then another recently, or I think fairly recently built project in Sunderland, which is a senior housing development, 30 units in a larger building. So just getting an idea of how these different styles of housing feel on the site once they're built, because it's a little different to see architectural drawings versus to experience the real thing. And then from here, the next thing we did was to sort of study these various scales of development on our site. So everything from these cottage courtyard developments, row houses, some smaller multifamily, getting to larger groupings, to a single larger building. Um, and just how each of the units we can fit, how they feel. All of these studies led us to our three design options. So um, we have three that are sort of trying to explore the whole breadth of what is feasible to build and fund and to fit into the context. So we've got at the smallest scale, that cottage courtyard scheme. We have a sort of a mid-sized, smaller multifamily, 4 units per building, and then one larger building where we are keeping the schoolhouse and creating a single building. And I'll get into each of these schemes. Um, so first, the cottage courtyard. This is our smallest scheme with 15 total units. So really definitely on the lower end of what would be ideal from a development perspective, but maybe workable. We're working for all of these with maybe with one exception I'll explain, but we're working with a minimum 1.5 uh, parking ratio. And so we have each of our courtyard, I keep saying courtyard instead of cottage, each of our cottages facing the street, but also facing the shared courtyard space. This is how that looks uh, in 3D, and then this we've got some images of how it will look from the street view. So each of our, and let me clarify that it's just a study. This is, this is one proposal, but the building massing could be totally different. But just to get an example of how this style of development might work, looking from the north down Southeast Street and then looking up, and we have these really beautiful four old trees on the site, and we're trying to maintain those in each of the schemes we developed. So, there's some natural sort of screening between the neighbors and the public and our development. Um, so the view from the south is largely of trees in many of these, but and then in the courtyard development, we have just a view of how that courtyard space might feel a little bit when you're in that coming from the street into that backyard space. And then this is the view from across the common. I have omitted the trees in the common because those really shield the development. But the view that the neighbors might have from across the street. This is our second development. Like I said, this is 4 units per building, 5 buildings for a total of 20 units. And we're looking at a mix of 2 and 3 bedrooms here, but that's, very flexible. Just, again, as with the building design and massing, this is one scenario, but these can be tweaked. But yeah, there's facing the street, we have 2 buildings, and I think that these two really kind of match the rhythm of the spacing of houses in the neighborhood pretty well. Um, they sort of match, the footprint of a few units at the scale that we develop them is actually not too out of line with some of the footprints of single family homes in the area. And then we have a few more toward the back of the site, and in this scheme, we've pulled the parking off to the side, which leaves us with this nice shared space between all of the houses, a little bit similar to the courtyard in the cottage courtyard scheme, but a different character, definitely. And that's how these sort of fit into the scale of the neighboring buildings. And to look at these from the street view. From the north, there's 2 different typologies here, one for the 3 bedrooms and one for the 2 bedrooms. So that's where you get one slightly larger building type, one smaller, and we're defining the entries with these little porches. 3 entries here for the 2 ground units and the upper floor units. But that's, again, one example, but you get sort of a nice view of this unit from the street, whereas the second one is behind that row of trees and is a little bit more shielded. Um, and that view from across the street where you can see both, more in the foreground and a little bit receded here. And then the final scheme, this I mentioned was the one exception. This has sort of a scheme 3A and 3B, where we're looking at preserving the school building and connecting to it with a single building. The single larger building works well with the scheme where we maintain the schoolhouse because we'll need to have, wheelchair accessibility throughout the school if we want to use that space. And so having a single elevator building makes that work a lot better than trying to have, thousands of feet of accessible ramp throughout the site. And so we're creating this little public space in the front, which is kind of a space already created by the school. We're using that space that's set back from the street to create a little public space. There's a little bit of a precedent for that type of space in the library just across the common from here, and it creates a really nice sort of antechamber type space to the common space. And again, another thing to be studied is whether the school is in fact used as a common space, a neighborhood amenity, or if it is also converted to more apartments. That's something we discussed in the first public meeting, and that's still up for discussion. We have a little drop off here, and then so this scheme is showing 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms mixed. The alternate scheme that we have is showing all 1 bedrooms, and this is a potential to study senior housing or another similar supportive housing type of use that works well with a larger elevator building. But either of these 2 plans are keeping the same building footprint and the same exterior massing, regardless of whether we, swap the plan around. And that's the parking differences. We'll keep 1.5 unless it's a building of all 1 bedrooms. In a senior housing scenario, we might bring it down, but still have at least 1 space per unit.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
Just wanted to mention too, so folks understand that the school scheme here does involve tearing down the mid-century modern
Oh,
addition
thank
to the
you.
school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very good point. We talked about that a little bit at the first meeting, but there was seemed to be consensus that there was not as much interest in the mid-century addition to the school. So we're assuming that half of the school is demolished either way. But this scheme is hanging on to the historic portion. So that's our existing school here from above. From the north, you can see this little space out in front that could be a pretty nice public space. This is the entry into the building through either a lobby, potentially a community space here, but something that interfaces with this plaza outside. The view from the south, again, you sort of see the end here, but a lot of the mass of the building is shielded by these nice trees. And our final view from across the street. And yeah, I think it's a really nice image here with the school sort of receding into the background. So, to summarize, we have all 3 of our schemes here. Our cottages, our smaller multifamily, and our larger New England in school expansion. And I think I talked quite a while, but I went through it fairly quickly, so we can feel free to flip back through both design portion of the slideshow, as well as any of the studies that we did earlier uh, in the in the process. Um, and thank you for coming to our presentation. But I'll stay on this slide for now, with our three different options.
Yeah, so it's a lot to digest. A lot of options to think about and consider, but we wanted to at this point just to open it up to folks with observations, questions, just to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Bob and Sarah. That was fantastic. And to folks joining us in the audience, I'm happy to welcome questions, and I think you can should have an option to raise your hand in the Zoom panel, and I can promote you to a panelist, so you can ask that question. And other folks, I think, should hopefully, if you prefer, you could submit a written question via the Q&A, and we can stack those and try to sort of answer common questions more efficiently. And I'll invite folks to submit a question in the Q&A, which looks like is live, or raise your hand and you can offer some feedback or ask a question. So,
Yeah.
and I'll just, while folks are kind of gearing those up, I'll just name one initially in the Q&A section, which is asking whether these would be rentals or condos. And I can maybe speak to that myself in saying we wouldn't know yet. Some of these typologies probably lend themselves more towards an ownership model. Some might lend themselves more toward a rental model. But at this point, unclear. Certainly for affordable rentals, probably the latter two might be more viable, I'd say. I don't know if Bob or Sarah, you have thoughts on that question?
Yeah,
All right.
I think there's a lot of possibilities, and sometimes these things come down to the actual developer and there when they start running the numbers, how they feel they can make it work, or where their subsidies are coming from. Is it for affordable home ownership? Is it market rate and affordable units? Is it a combination? So some of that will depend on where they can find funding for the project too.
Sure. So I see a much more questions coming in the Q&A, and at least one person raising their hand. So maybe what I'll do is I'll find whoever that person is with a hand raised, and then promote them, and then try and stack some questions. I have Erica Zikos with a question. Erica, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. You can choose to keep your camera off if you like, or join us with your face. But look for a pop-up on your screen.
And I'll keep this image up for now, but let me know if we want to, shift the focus to the conversation, and I'll stop sharing.
Do we get Erica? I suppose it's possible some people are speaking on their phone, and maybe it's harder to use the Zoom interface. So yeah, folks. So Erica, it looks like I wasn't able to promote you, but if you want to, maybe I'll just allow you to talk here and see if that's helpful.
I'm so sorry. I tried to unmute and my finger slipped and I totally lost Zoom for a minute.
All
Apologies for
good.
everybody's
Welcome.
stall. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Greg, and thanks, Joy Squared. I really appreciated seeing the range of scales here. And I'm kind of surprised myself at how much I like the cottage courtyard scheme. There's just something about the neighborhoodliness of it. And I recognize that there are a lot of competing interests here. It has to pencil out from the developer side. The community is interested in some shared spaces. The neighbors, kind of want a certain scale that recognizes the scale of the neighborhood. And I noticed that in the cottage courtyard and the small multifamily option two, that there isn't any indoor shared community space. So I'm wondering if Joy Squared could speak to what you explored and what the limitations are there. And I'm wondering if Greg, you could speak to what the town of Amherst feels might be a priority after listening to so many opinions for shared community space. Thanks.
Yeah, I can chime in, Erica. I know that with a lot of these cottage developments, there often is a common building that's shared space. So that's something that could be worked into the scheme. You know, it's when developers go to look for funding and subsidies, it's always a challenge for them, the amount of shared space they can work into the budget because they don't get subsidies for that kind of space. They just get it for the number of units typically. But I think it's a good component. It's a place for people to meet, to gather. It helps build community. And you know, there's a question about, okay, is it just for the people in this development or is it for the whole neighborhood? You know, that's the school option kind of leaned more in that direction of, you know, potentially common space for the whole neighborhood. But probably in a cottage development, usually the space I think is for people who live in the cottage development.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. And I'd say, certainly, you know, we wouldn't rule that out, and I think one of the things we're trying to balance, Bob spoke a little bit about the financial realities, which are that's harder to pay for that shared space, and then also one of the sort of just neighborhood context things we observed is that there's both public and private community space, just across the street. So in the library, there's gathering space, and then the church, kind of kitty corner, also has what I believe is a rentable space or a gathering space, which is a separate thing. So that's one thing that led us not to deeply prioritize community space. But if this got to the stage where folks were submitting formal proposals, perhaps they would want to include that. And I think also just the various typologies, some might lend themselves to indoor community space more than others. Um, and I want to just name a few questions here, and I'll just read them off and then kind of speak to them. Um, you know, um, is the town considering selling the property to allow development, or considering developing it itself? Um, should an initiative on this property go forward, probably it would entail some sort of disposition process where the town would partner with a developer with, fairly explicit agreements, requiring certain parameters. Um, Generally, the town wouldn't itself be the agent to build something like this in the same way we would build a public building. Yeah, generally, we don't build residential for sort of wonky reasons, mostly involving cost and expertise. Um, Questions about other uses for the building. Perhaps it seems as though a decision's already been made on housing. Thanks, Engage, for that question. I will note, so the vision behind this engagement was to scope the possibility of, of different residential typologies. Some of those could include other uses for the existing building, or perhaps a newly built thing. Right now, but that's kind of what the priority for this engagement was to explore the possibility of residential. So I wouldn't say other stuff has been formally ruled out, although I will say that um, uh, if it weren't in conjunction with housing, a lot of the possible uses might be hard financially. Um, the Another question was around, and I think perhaps this gave you an option of anonymity, so I'll maybe not name names upon consideration. But what are the different environmental impacts between the three options? Bob or Sarah, do you have any thoughts on environmental realities, of these different approaches, or perhaps impacts? Or Dave, if you're still on, you could weigh in too, perhaps.
I wonder if the person could clarify when they're talking about environmental, are they thinking about energy efficiency? Are they thinking about things like stormwater management? Are they thinking about possible contaminated soils? Sometimes people think about that with environmental. issues there. Could you clarify a little bit more about environmental? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could fit under the environmental heading.
Sure, it's a great clarifying question, Bob. So I guess I'll just maybe invite the asker of that question to raise their hand. I can make you a speaker. Um, and maybe while someone's figuring out Zoom, I'll just sort of knock off a quick one after that, which is what are the materials used for the exterior walls and roofs? And I think it's fair to say at this point we don't know, right? Yeah, this is not that level of detail.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, I was just going to say what here we're showing just a very typical white lap siding, which is pretty common in the neighborhood. We certainly wouldn't go as far as to select a color now. It's one of many options, but it's yeah.
And I think
Sure.
there's also the energy efficiency. Amherst is they've opted to adopt the specialized stretch code. So the energy efficiency level of the buildings would be at a higher level than other parts of the state. We just have the stretch code. Likelihood that these buildings would probably be all electric and fossil fuel free. So that's one aspect of the environmental question. I don't know if that's what the person was getting at, but we can talk
and
more about
yeah,
that.
and I'm going to allow her to talk right now.
Okay.
Ms. Kraus-Bazorna, go ahead.
Hi, yes. I was really wondering kind of like overall what you were looking at, like when you were thinking of these different design ideas, like what were you considering in terms of environmental impact when you were looking at the individual ones?
Yeah, I think there shouldn't be a huge difference between the schemes except in scale. More square footage, more residents does have a proportional impact, with the exception that having fewer larger buildings is a little more efficient from a thermal energy efficiency perspective, in terms of passive house design, sort of the fewer exterior walls, the better. So there is a little bit to be gained by having few buildings or one larger buildings rather than individual buildings, but yeah, Bob might have more nuance
Yeah.
than.
Oh, just to build on that, sir, I think that the New England End building would, in the end, it would be easier to make it more energy efficient than the cottage buildings because there's less envelope, just the total volume of square footage of the envelope or the exterior skin of the building. So that means that probably the larger New England End building, that's one building, is going to have a lower carbon footprint than the others. I think they can all be very energy efficient, but I think it probably in the end would be the most energy efficient.
Yeah,
And I guess
thanks.
another factor in terms of energy efficiency is that the school building, a renovation can be a little bit trickier. That occurred to me because I was thinking that one of the precedents we looked at for the school option, the New England Inn option, is another project that we worked on recently, which we have achieved passive house rating for that. So it's a little trickier with the existing building, but it is definitely
Mhm.
possible. So
Mhm.
And I'll add that we have uh, an answer to a quick question about tax revenue is would this property produce tax revenue if developed? And the answer is yes. And how much would depend both on what kind of development was executed and at whom it was aimed. If it was all formally deed restricted affordable homes, those generally produce taxes relate a lower rate based on their their deed restricted lower value. If there was some market rate housing, it would obviously produce substantially more. Um, and then somebody else asked just to speak more generally about costs related to the school building and what that might look like. From the cost or challenges of preserving the existing building and the pros and cons of that.
Right, right. It will cost more per square footage to renovate the building than it will to build the new structure in terms of dollar a square foot cost. And some of that is, we can we can save as much as we can of the building, but we still, to get it up to standards for energy efficiency, we'd be stripping the inside to um, build a more robust thermal envelope. But we've also got to think about accessibility. So one of the things about keeping the school and making it a common space would be it needs to be accessible to everybody. So that means figuring out how to get each floor level accessible. And that's why the New England N scheme uh, looks at that and looks at using an elevator to get into the school as well as into all the levels of the housing itself. But the school is just it's more money. It's more challenging to make energy efficient, and but sometimes it's still worth it. There's not only reasons to save an existing building in terms of carbon footprint, but there's also just the kind of cultural and historic value of a building like that that's been in a neighborhood a long time. So that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And Bob, I would just add a more practical lens, which we've spoken to a little bit, but unlike the development, some might be familiar with that Wayfinders is doing at the former East Street School and at a separate site in Belchertown Road with a higher number of units to sort of subsidize the deeper costs of renovating that school. Here, at the very high end, we'd be talking about a lower number of units to sort of subsidize those added costs of remodeling. Again, might be worth it, but it's a financial reality that an external partner would definitely be evaluating when determining whether to be involved in an effort like this or not. And that I hope speaks to some degree to a question about the value of keeping the school in all options from a neighborhood resident. And so, yeah, it is conceivable. I don't think we would rule it out. In any case, some of those options would require things to be moved around. But we tried to reflect to some degree what we thought financial realities might be.
Yeah,
So,
actually, if it's okay, I'll just flip really, well, actually, it might not be that quickly. There's a lot of slides in this presentation, but just back to the scale studies. Here we go. We definitely did sort of do a quick, we can only get into detail on so many, but we did a quick look at most of these, whether it's, for example, the courtyard, the cottage courtyard. If we can fit 15 in comfortably on the site without it, maybe we could get 10 in if we do keep it. So that's definitely something that we did study in brief. And there's probably an option for most of them to keep it. It's just sort of a question of feasibility.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question noting traffic and speed are already a concern on Southeast Street and in the common area, and homeowners are adding informal signs naming the speed limit. And how might traffic be managed, and would sidewalks be added? And I think officially we can't say whether we could definitely do a sidewalk there or not, but I think one strategy to make to add to overall livability might be to do some traffic calming in conjunction with what would ultimately be a private development. That is something I think we could prioritize as the town, where we go forward with something here. And I would hope that you know overall that experience could be improved in the context of a development like this.
Mhm. I think you'll notice too, we didn't really mention it yet, but some of the schemes have a pretty efficient use of parking in paved area, which means people walk a little further from their car to get to their unit. And so there's less paving, less movement of vehicles in that sense. So that's something to think about too. In the different options you'll see, sometimes the one scheme had a loop all the way around, so there was more paving there, but other schemes had a minimal amount of paving. And again, people would just have to walk a little further from their car to their unit.
And I'll note also another question from a few minutes ago, which I think I didn't address, is the question of public transportation. And there is not currently transit along Southeast Street here. It is a fair bit of a walk. Um, Probably a fairly heavy lift, although not impossible to reroute transit. But that would be a factor that external partners would consider as well, and might inform what folks might be willing to build here. Some folks who are involved in development of affordable homes might be hesitant to do something, without a transit solution, at least for certain populations, right? Some, if it were a home ownership thing, it might be okay. If you were doing rentals for very low income people, that might be a stretch in the eyes of some affordable home developers. And then, questions around a senior center, and some amount of interest in that at our original meeting. Joy Squared did look at a senior option on the housing side. Wasn't there bailiwick to sort of look at uses without residential? I guess the direct answer is no. We didn't look at a senior center by itself, but I know there's interest in that just overall in town. In this case, this particular engagement was focused on residential uses, sometimes in conjunction with community uses that as we've been discussing. Which of these design leaves the most option, or which of these designs leaves the most open land? Is an interesting question.
Yeah, that is a good question, and I didn't do like an FAR calc for any of these. We can look at we can look at the overall gross square footage, but that's obviously, among different floor levels. So, I think actually for some of these, the bigger difference between the schemes ends up being the parking more than the building mass. At least with the single building scheme, there's we're building a little bit taller and a little bit more efficient in the single envelope, and I think maybe the biggest thing making a difference is the parking. Sorry, I didn't put together numbers for that. Bob, what would you say?
Yeah, I think in that scheme, the multifamily scheme there, you see that there's there's uh there's a fair amount of open space in the courtyard scheme, but there's a loop road that goes all the way around. This is a one-way street, by the way, or driveway, I should say,
Mhm.
that comes in one side on the right there on the south side, and then loops around to exit. So you don't have cars exiting and entering at the same curb cut or drive on that. But the other one, the multifamily, if you go to that, Sarah, the plan, you'll see that it's pretty efficient with its parking. It's all stacked on one side there, so there's less paving, which leaves you more open space. Um, so I don't know. We could do that calculation. We could look at what's
Yeah.
actually a permeable space, meaning that it's not a building footprint or it's not paving, parking anyway, asphalt paving for parking.
Yeah, visually, it's looking to me like it might be the middle scheme because largely because of the way that the parking is sort
Yeah,
of on the side there.
that would be my guess too, without
Yeah,
having the actual calculation. Yeah.
just a visual scan. Yeah, we can definitely provide those numbers.
So another question, which might, as noted by the questioner, be down the road, But have we considered things like solar panels or water reclamation or a community garden? And yeah, I think that is correct. That probably would be a bit down the road, but I think increasingly, you know, certainly developers of affordable homes are trying to prioritize that stuff, both from efficiency
Mhm.
perspectives and also just for community building perspectives. I suppose I shouldn't make assumptions around resources available for solar as dynamics change at the federal and state level, which often subsidizes those things. But certainly, I think that especially for a site like this, features like that would be a something to prioritize, and I think something that with community input, the town might include in a possible eventual engagement with or agreement with a partner. Um, and then a couple of questions.
I
So
think that's
why are we
helpful.
targeting the historic district with ARP zoning overlay? And then related are other visioning studies taking place for new housing and other lots in town, such as the old golf course. The town, has prioritized, affordability in a variety of ways. One of the ways that we can advance that goal is by deploying sites that we do own or control in some fashion. So that's why we're taking a look at this site, and we are indeed taking a look at other sites. I believe there are plans to do something similar, just a design scope exploration with the appropriate parts of the old golf course to see if that's possible. A process that's a little further along is something with a more targeted objective up on Main Street, where we have hopes to build a shelter and some supportive housing, and another lot the town owns. We're looking at a few different locations, and this is among them. And then, next steps. So I think sort of, we would finish up our engagement with Joy Squared, and kind of sort of put a bow on their offerings. And then from there, I think the town staff would sort of have to come up with a strategy on, whether to go forward and, how to weigh these different options or perhaps others or combinations of these, and then figure out, what's the, whether to, you know, move forward in this site or prioritize other stuff or so forth.
Hey, Greg, it
Um,
looks like Dave has his hand up.
oh, go ahead, Dave. I think you can unmute yourself. Right? Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I just wanted to weigh in quickly, thank Bob and Sarah and the team at Joy Squared. I'm really pleased with kind of the outcome and the visuals that we're seeing tonight. I also want to thank everyone for coming. We've got, I think, off and on, we've got close to 40 people on this call as part of this discussion and part of this presentation. So that's really exciting. And again, I just wanted to kind of circle back to something Greg said a minute ago. There was one question about, are we looking at other sites? And, I'm really pleased that the planning department is looking, across town at properties that the town has owned for many years. We started out many, many years ago looking at the East Street School site. We acquired some property on Belchertown Road, and as Greg said, Wayfinders is now moving forward with a housing proposal there, which is very exciting. We are looking at this site now, and we're also going to look, as one of the participants asked about Hickory Ridge. We'll be looking at some of the frontage over at Hickory Ridge. And there are likely other town properties that we'll be looking at in the years to come. So this is part of the early, as Greg has emphasized, the early visioning exercises that we do with the public, with the neighbors, with the butters, and with the broader Amherst community to say, in this case, housing has been identified as a very high priority by the town council. The council has put goals in the town manager's performance and goals for his outcomes over the next couple of years. And staff is moving forward to explore what options we can help bring to the table. So nothing has been finalized on this site. We have many, many steps to go and many more meetings before anything happens on this site, but this is a first step in visualizing what could happen. So I'm excited by it, and I thank Joy Squared for giving us some things to think about. And these images are really exciting, and we'll move forward in 2026 with next steps.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, Dave.
And I think we have gotten to just about all these questions. I do have one, just kind of reiterating the inquiry around other uses. I think it is conceivable that another use could be deployed for this site. What we're looking at right now is the possibility of residential development. Other uses, I'm not quite sure what other possibilities might be. There isn't necessarily, in terms of partnering with private partners, that's tends to be the thing that they want to build. I'm not sure if it would be an appropriate site for other town-driven uses. But in any case, we look at those in this engagement. But technically, there's nothing written in stone that says this location has to be for homes. And I think we have addressed questions. If folks want to raise hands or submit more questions, into the Q&A function, we'd be happy to address those. I think.
And Greg, do you want just let folks know that this study will be a kind of a final submission of it to the town that folks can look at later on as well as the recording that you've made here tonight.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, we will have this recording posted online, hopefully in a few days. Which feel free to refer it to neighbors or friends, and then Joy Squared, as Bob mentioned, will submit kind of a full report, probably reiterating a lot of the images and slides that we see here, kind of in a different aspect ratio, perhaps. But yeah, a lot of this information and a few more renderings of the different options and so forth. And at that point, we'll probably have a more formal statement around, kind of what our hope for next steps are. Perhaps that'd be a town addendum to that.
Greg,
yeah,
where can people find this study if they weren't able to come and this recording? Will it be on the planning department part of the website?
Oh, that's a great question. I think as a default off the hook answer, I'll promise to either post it or at minimum link to it from the page of the Amherst Affordable Housing Trust, simply because I can manage that page. But yeah, certainly on the Housing Trust page or the Planning Department page, we'll post this and other resources related to this engagement. We'll make sure that's all online.
Yeah, perhaps we could make it available in both places. There'll be a
Yeah,
link
we'll
in the
make it
planning
one of the
department as
available.
well as the housing trust. Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. And if folks have specific questions or just want to communicate directly with staff, we're certainly open to that as well. Obviously beyond tonight, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we'll answer questions about content or process as best we can.
Yeah, and Sarah and I would like to thank all the folks who came tonight, and again, a large group came to the first meeting over at the church. Would just really enjoy working with you, and want you to know how important it is and how valuable it is to have so many people who care enough about these things to show up to these meetings and participate in the discussion. It I think will bear good fruits in the end. So thank you all for coming tonight, and thanks to the town staff, to Greg and Dave and Nate and Rob too, who we've met with multiple times on it. I think it shows a real dedication to giving this process the kind of attention and patience that it needs to come up with at some point a solution. Nobody quite knows what that is yet, but you've been very dedicated to seeing it through. So thank you.
Well, and likewise, our deep appreciation to Bob and Sarah and the Joy Square team for your your creative solutions and ideas here, and for being really responsive to some of the feedback, both from the community, from staff, from sort of the development community. We really appreciate your efforts here and your work to support affordable homes around the state. All right, so I think, not seeing any more questions, I will go ahead and conclude our meeting, and stay tuned for next steps.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, all. Bye-bye.